Did the Republican Party corrupt Christianity so much that even Jesus can't save it? Check it out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Anthony Fauci is pointing out that 3-4 million people a day being vaccinated. This, by the way, this after Donald Trump had said, no, we don't need any more than 100,000 doses. Remember, he turned them down? Biden had to scramble like crazy to order more doses for the country. It's incredible, but anyhow, Fauci says maybe no fourth wave. This is a big deal. We'll get into that a little later on in the program. In our second hour, I want to get into this decision by the parliamentarian yesterday and how we should strategize, how Democrats should be talking to each other, particularly given that Joe Manchin has stepped up to defend private equity and Wall Street in terms of not just Wall Street, it's like a subsection of Wall Street that has heavily funded his campaigns. You know, these private equity leeches that are benefiting from the corporate tax cut right now in a big way. In fact, they reinvented their corporate. Anyhow, we'll get into that in the second hour. But at the end of this hour, or no, at the end of the second hour, excuse me, I'm sorry. Debbie Hines is going to be with us, giving us an update on what's going on in the Chauvin trial, which is ongoing. And in our third hour, Dr. Michael Mann is going to drop by. Much of the West is in a decades-long mega drought. What does that mean? Where do we go next? Are we going to have to be using breathing aids, you know, like the Easy Flow, just to make it through another fire season? I mean, last year, on top of the pandemic, we couldn't breathe in our own house. It's incredible. Anyhow, we'll get into that in the third hour with Dr. Michael Mann. But I wanted to start out with this kind of essential and fundamental question. Can depraved evangelical Christianity reform itself, or should it just go away? I mean, the Republicans and Donald Trump have thrown evangelical Christianity, and this goes back 40 years, but they've thrown evangelical Christianity into kind of a death spiral, at the very least, a full-blown crisis. And Republican politicians are now doubling down on exploiting religious people. And it's now killing churches, as well as killing people, in a way that we haven't seen in living memory. I mean, we've watched absolute depravity wash across our body politic over the last couple of decades, right? Stolen election in 2000, being lied into 2 wars by Bush and Cheney. 4 years of a Trump presidency with literally nothing to show for it except for a huge tax cut for billionaires, the destruction of international relationships, thousands of children tortured, and 500,000 dead Americans. We had a president who raped women, who made fun of mentally disabled people, who tried to take away Obamacare, Social Security, Medicare, food stamps, and unemployment from American citizens, who intentionally tore America apart racially and religiously just for money and power. He ripped children from their mother's arms at the border. He tortured those kids for years, killing at least 7 of them. He called Nazi white supremacists very fine people. He tried to eliminate health care for poor Americans. He vilified refugees. And he did all this in the name of Christianity. I mean, let that sink in. Right? On January 6th, when they attacked the Capitol building, a large contingent of that group knelt and prayed before they began killing people. The day before, on January 5th, there was a whole bunch of the same people, the, quote, Christians among them, who marched in circles around the Capitol, chanting and praying, carrying giant wooden crosses. They called it their Jericho March because they thought that if they did this, it might cause the walls to come tumbling down the next day so they could invade the Capitol. And hey, it looked like it would work for a while, right? This is not what Jesus would have done. He was preaching morality, not politics. He was preaching spirituality, not politics. And the consequences of this are pretty stark. Back when I was born in 1951, the average number of Americans who went to church every Sunday was 73%. It hit a low when George W. Bush lied us into the war in Iraq. That was 65%. But for the first time in the memory of anybody alive today, it has now dropped below half. 47% of Americans go to church. That's amazing. I mean, organized religion is collapsing. And this is not the first time that religion has been corrupted by politics or vice versa. It's the first time, in a really huge way. But this was a debate that went back to the founding of our republic. Jefferson and Madison had literally a years-long running debate about this in their letters and their correspondences. One of the results of it was Article 6 of the Constitution. There's no religious test. No person shall be subject to a religious test. Here it is, the exact language. No religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office of public trust under the United States. Any office of public trust, right? Dog catcher. You can't run for it or you can't say only only Christians need apply. But this was the big debate that they had. Jefferson was convinced that if a priest, his favorite phrase, but he meant that more broadly, ever became a major political figure in America, that our republic was at risk. Jefferson, of course, was an atheist and a deist. And James Madison was a churchgoer. I think he was a Presbyterian, as I recall. And he was concerned about something quite different. He was concerned that if government started helping out churches, that it would corrupt the churches. And it turns out, and in fact, Madison was so concerned about that his first veto when he became president in 1809, his first veto was to veto a law that Congress had passed to give money to churches in Washington, D.C. to run poorhouses. And he said, no, you can't do that. In fact, from his veto message, he said doing this would, quote, be a precedent for giving to religious societies as such a legal agency in carrying into effect a public and civil duty. He said instead the money has to go straight to the poorhouse, can't go through the churches. But all this really started in the 80s during the Reagan administration, when Reagan hired the son of his vice president George H.W. Bush, that guy's son, George W. Bush, hired George W. Bush as an outreach guy to the evangelical community. And this is when, Falwell and Robertson and all these guys were really hitting their stride, and Jim Baker and Tammy Faye and their heated doghouse and their multi-million-dollar mansions. And Reagan just welcomed these people in. I mean, we've had Jeff Charlotte on this program talking about this too. And they've been fleeced. Evangelical Christians for 40 years now have been fleeced by their own pastors, the ravening wolves among the sheep. So where does this, and in fact, the single group in America that has the highest probability of saying, no, I won't get a vaccine, are white evangelicals. So where does this go? How does this play out? In Northern Europe and Scandinavia, churches are pretty much empty on Sundays. They're mostly just places to get married and to go to funerals. They're way scaled back. Is that the direction we're heading? Would that be a good thing or a bad thing? I could argue either side of that, frankly. Are Republicans ever going to stop exploiting Christians for political gain? I mean, will the people of faith turn away from these modern-day Caesars who are reaching out their gnarled fingers, to extract money from their pockets and votes from them? I mean, this corruption of religion over a 40-year period by the Republican Party, very intentionally, and the corruption of the Republican Party by a bunch of religious leaders who wanted power and money, has just brought the whole institution to its knees, the institution of religion. Now, granted, there are strong progressive churches in the United States, and many of them are doing just fine, thank you very much.